I was born in what became a chicken house of my grandfather's, in a little gully about 8 or 9 miles north of Selkirk, Kansas, and that's in the area of Lakota, Kansas, but that's where I was born, and lived there only a couple of years, and was moved to Ashland, Kansas, and my father was a cowboy. When we were in Selkirk, he worked for my grandfather and for Swayzes and others in the area. But after a couple of years, they moved to Ashland. And at Ashland, he worked for the Hudson Ranch, and still a cowboy. And I was born, I was born at Selkirk, but I grew up the first 4 or 5 years then at the Hudson Ranch in near Ashland, Kansas. And then we moved from there when I was just before I went into first grade to Bloom, Kansas, and this is where my uncle was blacksmith, and my father went to work for him, and learned the blacksmith trade. And it was during those early years that we lived in what used to be a cabin camp, and a cabin camp is different from a motel. A cabin camp has houses, has lodging, and then there'll be an open space for to park your car.
Okay.
And then another housing.
I've seen those.
And this was owned by my other grandfather, who was my dad's mother. And I guess I need to go back. It was during those years, those early years, while we were at Ashland, that Mother and her sister was driving to go to town, and in an old Model T, and hot summer day, and I was sitting between the two of them, and I began to be overcome by carbon monoxide, and I leaned over against my mother, and she kind of flopped me back and over against Clara, and then she realized that I had passed out, and she stopped alongside the road and got me on her lap and was horse crying and praying at the same time, and she promised the Lord, if he would spare my life, that she would commit me to him forever. And then she did like so many Christians do, she forgot all about it. And the Lord spared my life. And when we went to Bloom, my folks never went to church. And I grew up through the 6th grade in Bloom, and my dad learned the blacksmith trade. He worked for I think it was $25 a week, and this was back in the early 40s, back during the Second World War. And he got a deferment because he was farming was a job that they were short men who repaired machinery and stuff like that. So he was there, and my uncle Ralph, that he worked for, had been a Baptist preacher in down in Vicey, Oklahoma, and something happened in the church, and he left the ministry and left the church and become a very worldly individual. And so I grew up in this for about 5-6 years, and my mother would try to help support us. She made donuts and from scratch, and she would make 10, 12, 14 dozen at a time. Memories as a child, I can remember her waking me up at daylight so she could have the space of my bed, so she could lay out her donuts so they could raise. And I mean, there were donuts on every chair, on every bed, on top of the refrigerators. Every place that there was a flat surface, she had donuts.
Oh my goodness!
And so she helped support the family during those times when we didn't have much of an income. And it was during my 6th grade that my father had a pretty strong temper, and so did my uncle. And so they Dad got mad one day and left, and they drove around a little bit, and they went to Mineola, Kansas, this is 7 miles. And Dad bought blacksmith tools and set up in my uncle's blacksmith shop. My uncle's John Deere building on the west end of it, where and this was an uncle of my mother's, and so we were in that blacksmith shop there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, 5 years, something like that. And then we built a building across the corner of from where we had been there in Mineola, and built a building, and it became Waitman's blacksmith shop.
Okay.
And we were there until Dad passed away. Oh gosh, it had been probably back in the 60s, and and I grew up there, went to high school, and I began to attend the Methodist church. Folks still were not going to church, and I was in high school, and along in my junior into my senior year, I'd learned the blacksmith trade from Dad, and still had a relationship with Uncle Ralph as well. But I purposed in my heart that I was going to be a blacksmith.
Yeah.
And my whole center of where I was going was I was going to be a blacksmith. And it was along in this time that the Methodist Church was having a revival, and a couple of deacons came to talk to me, and they said, "Harold, you've been attending our church a long time, and we'd like for you to come Sunday morning and be baptized and join our church." And they were right. The Lord had really been dealing with my heart. But Mom had enough Baptist teaching and principles in my growing up that I knew sprinkling wasn't baptism as far as I was concerned. So we found a Methodist church at Buckland, Kansas, which is 35 miles away, I guess. And I requested being baptized by immersion. And I did. And they went along with me. And it was right along at this time that the Lord opened up an opportunity for me to lease by a blacksmith shop in Ashland, Kansas. This was 35 miles south and a little east of Mineola. And it was Harold's blacksmith shop. And so this was in March of 1951 that I went down, and I would go down on, had released from high school, that I would go down on Thursday afternoon and work in the blacksmith shop, my blacksmith shop, from Thursday until Monday morning. And I was pretty involved in my shop, and it was about 2 weeks. And by the way, when I was in Ashland, I was staying with my great grandmother and an aunt that never married, and they lived about a block from my blacksmith shop. And so I'd go down and stay with Grandma and work Thursday through Sunday, and then go back to Mineola and go to school. And this went on for about 2 weeks, and the Lord, one morning I stuck the key in the door and turned the key, and as audible as you and I are sitting here, I heard the Lord say, "Harold, this is not where I want you." He said, "I want you to preach."
Oh, wow.
And so I immediately began to make preparations to close out my shop. Now this was in probably the 1st of April, along in there somewhere. But I began to make plans right then to close out my shop at the end of the summer. This would I could make enough money for my tuition for my first year. And back then tuition was $1,000 a semester.
That's pretty steep in that day.
Well, but anyway, I made that decision, and I had been attending the Baptist Church in Ashland, and I made all the preparations and stuff to make that move, and told Mr. Howell that I couldn't, that I felt the Lord's call to preach. And it was strange as I began to let this be shared with with the men who were my customers, the only man that encouraged me was a Catholic. And he said, Harold, I think this is the greatest thing in the world. He said, I think you ought to go for it. Everybody else said, man, you're crazy. You got this, and what are we going to do for a blacksmith, and all this kind of stuff. And I had some experiences along there when one day the bearings went out of my trip hammer, and it was into the summertime, and I was needing it to sharpen plowshares and stuff, and my dad and my uncle had some Babbitt and that to run for bearings, and they both closed their shops and came down and helped me run bearings on my trip hammer, and and as a result of my surrendering to preach, it made a radical change in my father. Now they had begun to go to Ashland to the Baptist church along about that time, but Dad was saved just shortly after, and my uncle went back to the ministry back and began to preach a little bit, and he was really a source of encouragement, and he preached one time his first sermon after he went back to the Lord, and it was such an inspiration to me, but kind of a weird thing. He said, Harold, he said, I have lost 40 years of my life. Mm-hmm. He said, I got up to preach, and he said, I called out a scripture, and I turned to it, and it wasn't there. And he said, I called another scripture, and it wasn't there either. And he said, I called out 4 scriptures, and they weren't there. He said, I lost every bit of that 40 years that I could have been a servant. Now, he went on to is still in the Methodist Church, but he went on to get his papers revised, and he became an adult teacher and was faithfully serving the Lord clear down until he passed away.
Oh, that's awesome.
And my dad gave his heart to the Lord and became a deacon. And Mom and Dad helped start a Southern Baptist, or a Northern Baptist church in my hometown of Mineola.
Oh.
As a result of this.
Oh, that's amazing.
And Dad became a deacon and a Sunday school teacher of junior boys, and Dad had a lisp when he got excited or got to talking in public. He would jerk his head, and it was a stutter type thing. And he just had a tremendous time when he got up in public and began to try to talk. Mm-hmm. And I saw God take that totally away from him. And he and Mother were active in that Baptist church there in Mineola for years until it finally closed down. And the pulpit that you use, that little pulpit that looks on, was one that Dad built for that church. And when they disbanded the church, I asked for that. Mm-hmm. and I took it to Pine Ridge, and then when we were through with it, I told the people at Pine Ridge, I said, now this is not your pulpit. This goes with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I brought it, and it will stay at Cascade Grove Baptist Church. But this was my conversion and my call. I went to Oklahoma Baptist University in the fall of '51, and I got a lot of letters from Emmanuel Baptist Church and the First Baptist Church and a lot of the Baptist churches. There was only 6 or 7 in this college town,
Mm-hmm.
and each one of them wanting me to come
Yeah.
and join their
Yeah.
church and get involved in their youth, and just before I got ready to leave for home for college, I got a penny postcard from Gabe Paxton, and he said, Harold, if you feel led, we would covet your membership because we're ministering to Indian people, and at that time Native American didn't figure in at all, but it was Indian people.
So Gabe, you told me, was the pastor of the Baptist Indian Mission of First Baptist Church.
Right.
Okay.
And so when I got to OBU on that first Sunday, I got checked in, and the folks were with me, and we went to the First Baptist Church, which was, a great big church, and they had 300 or 400 people in their services, and we decided to we went there, and then that night the folks had left, and I went down in the East Main of Shawnee, where Oklahoma Baptist University was, and I climbed about 25 steps up and into the Indian Mission, and met Gabe, and that night when the invitation was given, I joined the church, and that's where I began to serve, and I became a junior boy Sunday school teacher, and shortly after that I got involved in the Royal Ambassador work, and so I started a Royal Ambassadors there.
Oh, wow. You started it.
Yes, I started it. And that was where I met
Ralph?
Yeah, that's where I met Ralph Hamlin. He was a 9-year-old, and we had wooden folding chairs, and that kid could squeak those things and get into more trouble. But I became actively involved in the church, and then shortly after that we moved down close to Kickapoo Avenue, which ran from the main part of town out to Oklahoma Baptist University, 2 miles. And I walked that many, many, many times. And it was there that Deloris and I met. I mean, we met at OBU, and we were trying to get a ride home for Thanksgiving vacation, and I was working the switchboard at the boys' dorm, Brotherhood dorm,
Okay.
and Deloris had called 3 or 4 guys, and they were all out at the parties and stuff, you know, homecoming or something.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to her roommate that was sitting beside her, she said, well, he won't be there either. And I told her, don't be so pessimistic. And that started a conversation. And we agreed to meet each other the next day at the library and make sure we knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
But we found out that we really lived only 60 miles away from each other.
Huh.
I had grown up there, and so we had agreed to meet, and when we agreed on the time and the place, I forgot that I had a date with an Indian girl at the very same place.
Wow.
So I showed up with this girl in tow, and I saw Deloris and spoke to her and went right into the library. And her roommate was standing beside her and made a comment as to the fact that I had given her a cold shoulder. And Deloris said, you know, it said he did what he said he was going to do. He met me. We knew who each other was, and it left at that. And then I called and apologized, and that was a mistake. And because as it worked out, we had a date, and we spent some time together, and eventually rode together, traveled together, going home. And but during this time, she got to coming to the Indian Mission with me, and I told her she'd have to ride the bus because I went early and met with the Royal Ambassadors on Wednesday nights, and so this all worked out. It was right along about this time that being involved in the Indian Mission, that I began to feel that, well, I had 2 experiences there at the Indian Mission. Number one was that we had a revival, and a pastor from Only Way Baptist Church up by Stroud was preaching revival, and he preaching along, I don't know, it was Wednesday or Thursday, and I went under real deep conviction that I had never given my heart to Jesus Christ. I had been baptized by immersion, and felt like I had my doctrine straightened out, but I became aware that I had never ever really given my heart to Jesus Christ. And so it was during this time that when Robert Falls from Only Way was preaching, and he was a unique individual. He never married, and I found out later, quite a bit later, that he was an uncle of Ralph Heiney.
Huh.
And he was working as a janitor at the tuberculosis hospital tuberculosis hospital
Mm-hmm.
at south of Shawnee. There at a little town just south of there. But anyway, he was a janitor and an OBU student, ministerial student, had led him to the Lord. Robert had a third grade education and snaggle-toothed and a tall, this time, gosh, Robert must have been 55, 60 years old. And he was preaching, and when the revival first started, I thought, gosh, this old guy, but boy, when he opened his mouth, the Word of God just flowed through it, and he was just such a dynamic preacher. And so I went forward one night, and it was along on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, along in there somewhere, and rededicated my life because I felt things were. And yet, as soon as I made that decision, I knew that wasn't it. And so I walked back to campus that night, at 2 miles. And there was a bunch of evergreen trees growing around a track field behind the girls' dorm, and then past it was Brotherhood, where I had my room. And I knelt underneath one of those cedar trees and asked the Lord to come into my heart and forgive me. And I can take it to the very spot. It's not, it's been changed into a garden and everything else. But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was saved that night, and later baptized again. And right along about that same time, God began to speak to my heart and lay upon it the Navajo of Arizona.
Oh, okay.
And I,
wow.
Boy, that it was as clear as it could be. And so I surrendered not only to, like I said, Deloris and I were going together, and by this time we had talked about this decision that I had made, or that the feelings that I had, not the decision that I had, but the feeling that I had. And one Sunday morning, Gabe was preaching, our pastor, and I felt the Lord just so strongly calling me, but I did like so many of us do. I backed off and waited, and finally the song leader had said, this is the last stanza. And I started to push by Deloris and go on by, and Deloris stepped out in front of me.
Oh.
And I had no idea what she was telling Gabe.
Yeah.
And then I went forward, and we had both committed our lives to service to the Native American. And
both of you at the same time?
Both of us at the same time.
Had you talked to each other prior?
And not in making any kind of a
wow.
And mine was a little bit further than hers in that it went to the Navajo. But we both felt the call that God wanted us in Indian mission work. We left there, and not very long afterwards, we met Dr. B. Frank Belvin. Dr. Belvin was a Creek Indian, but at that time he was the head of language missions to the part of language missions that worked with Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And B. Frank became a friend of ours, and he and his wife were so close to us. And so we then we got married. Deloris had always felt like she wanted to be a nurse, and so she went to OBU 1 year, and it was during this time we made our commitment and everything.
Yeah.
But our plans was to get married the next June, but she was going to go to Wichita, Kansas, and work at Beach Aircraft.
Oh, wow.
And so we kept on corresponding and planning to get married, and I was at OBU preparing for to be a missionary, whatever. And we got she found out that she had hurt her back to where that she would not be accepted as a nurse. Couldn't handle the back part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided that we were going to get married in December of it would be 52, I believe.
Okay.
And she went up there to work, and I went to OBU. We got married 23rd of December, 1952. And we bought us a little trailer house, 28 feet long, 8 feet wide, and moved into Shawnee, and she was going to work, and that was going to be our support. And she went to work at a job, Sylvania, which was, they made radio bulb parts, and she worked a couple of days, and she broke out in hives, and very shortly, within 3 months, she was pregnant, and never able to work. And I worked as a gardener for 35 cents an hour, and still tried to go to school, but the Lord took care of us, and it was along in March, I think, or April, that Dr. Belvin came by the house one time, and he said that he wanted to know if I would be interested in pastoring the Kickapoo Indian Church.
Really?
And he said, now, the pastor is retiring, and the church is 6 miles out in the country.
Okay.
From Pine Ridge, or from Shawnee.
Shawnee.
And he said, why don't you go out and preach
Okay.
and see how it goes with you and with the people. And so we went out on. I guess what happened. He was at the Shawnee Indian Mission on Sunday morning, and he asked us if we'd be home that afternoon. And so he came by and told us about and asked us to go out. So we went out the next Sunday, and we preached, and we felt like that maybe this is where God wanted us. I had tried at a church down by Seminole one time to pastor, and they had chosen another fellow, Bill Yardy, and it was funny. They liked my preaching, but he had a wife that played the piano.
Oh.
And and Bill and I have been friends for years and years. His wife's now gone, and gosh, he's 90 some years old. But we went out and preached, and Dr. Belvin called us the next day or two, and he said, how would you like to become pastor at Kickapoo? And he said, become a part of the home mission board.
Oh, no way.
And I said, okay, yeah, that would be fine.
Huh.
And he said, well, I'll send you an application. And this application was one sheet of a typing paper. And so we filled it out, sent it in. Now this was along in April, last of March, 1st of April, along in there somewhere.
Okay.
And so we became pastor at the Kickapoo Indian Church. And it was May before we got our appointment, but also before we got our first check. And so, and if memory serves me right, we were making about $320 a month. And of course, money went a little further back then, but we became pastor out there, and within a short time during that summer, we moved our trailer house out of Shawnee, where we were paying $25 a month rent on it, and moved it out to the churchyard. The church had about 2 acres of land. D.D. Cooper had been the pastor at Kickapoo for over 35 years.
Oh.
And a young preacher go in and follow a pastor that had been there for so long. And but our churchyard had quite a slope to it. Had a lot of blackjack oak in it, and had a well, and the building, as the years went by, I began to learn the history of this, and it was so unique. This church was probably 20 feet wide and 30 feet long, 35 feet long, not any more than that, one room.
Huh.
And one day I had some electrical problems, so the outside of it was was just wood with this rolled roofing around it,
Mm-hmm.
nailed around it, and the inside of it was varnished plywood. And I took off one of those panels, and I couldn't believe what I saw. In the walls were about 6-7 inches thick,
Mm-hmm.
but in the walls were cedar posts
Okay.
that about every 4 foot, 5 foot, and they had 2x6s nailed in between them.
Mm-hmm.
That everything was nailed.
Yeah.
To. And but what had happened when D.D. Cooper became pastor out there was no money to build a building. He finally got enough from the whole mission board to build a shade. And what they did, they put these poles ever so often,
Yeah.
and then built a roof
Huh.
over it.
Like a picnic shelter, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And but the thing was, they had church up there
Huh.
even through the winters.
Oh my goodness.
They had a big wood stove,
Uh-huh.
and they would huddle around this wood stove and burn heaps of it.
Mm.
And he would preach and minister to those people.
Mm.
And while we were at the Kickapoo, we had Dr. Lloyd Corder
Okay.
was at that time the director of language missions, and Dr. Corder was going to do a speaking engagement at OBU, and so I made arrangements with him to come out and look at our needs out there, and we were running somewhere around 50, 60 young people in church, and we had to pick them up.
Mm-hmm.
We did it in our car.
In your car?
In our car. And well, I'd make a trip or two north and a trip or two back toward town, and before every service, and then have to take everybody home. And so we were talking about that we needed a building, and so we Dr. Corder was coming, and Joe the Baptist was his ventriloquist doll, and he spoke at OBU, and I had seen him work with Joe many times, and but anyway, he came out and he looked, and I had built a building. I had walls on it, a roof on it, and where the roof would hinge off, and you could see down inside, and I put partitions in it.
Yeah.
And I had it all set up, and so I talked to after he had spoke at OBU, he went out to the church, and as we sat out there underneath the trees, I showed him this, and I had gotten an estimate, and we could build the building for $3,500.
Mm-hmm.
And in his wisdom, he kind of smiled, and after we had talked for quite a bit about it, and location on the property and everything else, he turned to me and he said, "Harold, do you think you could build this building for $5,000? And I said, "Yes, sir."
Yeah.
And so now I had told you earlier that the Home Mission Board had not helped us financially, but they did on this building.
Okay.
And so we had college students, friends that I had met at school, that came out and attended church. And Joel Heffley and Joe Mosley, of which Joel, our third son, is named after these two guys.
Okay.
And but Joel's father was an architect in Oklahoma City, so he agreed to do our building for us.
Your what?
Our building.
Oh, your building. Okay.
Draw the architect plans for it. And as we sat down and talked, he made it simple enough that I could understand it. And I had never been around building. I take a piece of iron and make anything you want out of it, but take a piece of wood.
Right.
And but there was a fellow who run the maintenance at OBU that I worked for a while, and he gave me suggestions, and the lumber yard took me under their wing.
Okay.
And with the lumber yard.
Yeah.
And they took our blueprint, looked at it, and began to work out. And we had college students, even had a professor or two, and 30, 40 kids built that church building.
Really? You had volunteer labor from the college?
Uh-huh.
That's pretty amazing.
And we had I found a block layer. He was actually a rock layer.
Okay.
But we made an agreement with him that I would mix mud for him, and he would lay the blocks for 10 cents a piece.
Is that good?
Yeah, it's up around $1 a block now.
Oh, that is a good deal.
But anyway, Bill agreed to do this, and I mixed mud, and that guy could eat more mud than and we had our kids. I mean our Indian kids, and they helped build that thing, and there was some bittersweet experiences with that. Everybody likes to put mud on sheetrock, and but when it's a half-inch thick, and it's not smooth, and it's on the ceiling, it was terrible.
I bet.
That's the reason that I am very touchy about anybody putting mud on the sheet, because I've been there and done it.
Yeah.
And the consequences of it. I've sanded it. I have taken a wet sponge and sponged it, trying to take off some of it. But anyway, we built that building, and the Lord just continued to bless. We just had a tremendous ministry there. Reached a lot of young people for the Lord, and eventually there was some adults came in, and you and I were talking the other day about people, probably Guy Stevens is dead by now, but Maggie, his wife, may still be around. And but Maggie and then there was a Gene Fry and his wife and children that came. But in the last year of our ministry at Kickapoo, these adults began to come in, and both of these men were both deacons. Gene was a deacon before he came in, and so we were able to see a lot of adults come. So I've gotten out of my call and into that first church.
All right. Well, you did pretty good without me even asking you any questions. Going into your first church there, can you recall anything humorous that happened at your first church? Any good stories?
Oh, let's see. There was a lot of things went on at that first church.
Yeah. Anything in particular?
Not a humorous story.
Okay.
In particular, but
significant, maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
Very significant. We had preached there for quite a while, and get her name here in a minute. Ruth Scott came to our church. She was a teenager, and she came, and it was one of those times, you'll understand this, because you'll preach your heart out, and Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and there's just no response.
Right.
And I was preaching quite a while, and one Sunday morning I preached, and I just felt like I just flopped tremendously, and almost to the point I didn't even get an invitation. And yet I gave an invitation, and just immediately here came Ruth Scott and gave her heart to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
That was our first convert.
Oh.
There at Kickapoo.
Okay.
And she became a very dear friend, and actively served the Lord. But it was we had, like I said, we had it was not to have 30, 40 young people, and Ruth's mother was Bessie, and her father was Bill, and Bill was a Piot man, a Piot leader, and P-E-Y-O-T-E.
Oh, peyote?
Yeah. And even though he was a Piot man, he allowed his wife and his children to come to church, and so we had a good relationship there, but never was able to touch Bill.
Okay.
There was a James and Ella Murdoch, and this was a tragic story of their lives, and he was Kickapoo Indian, and Ella was a white woman that married him. And by the time I got there, they had, oh gosh, it must have been 8 or 9 children. And at least 4 of those children were James's by his own daughter. And Ella was such a sweet lady, and her and her children came to church. James just drank like a fish.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask about humor. James was in jail one day, and I went up to visit him, and the sheriff, of course, I knew well because of James and others. But James and I were talking, and the sheriff said, "James," he said, "tell you what," he said, "if you can throw my deputy today, I'll just let Harold take you home." James looked at him and he said, "No, sir. I'll bet you that deputy weighed 350 pounds. Just a monster of a guy." But I witnessed to James again and again and again and again. We had a revival meeting, and I took a preacher out to talk to him, Ralph Dersham. And
Dershin?
Okay. And we had gone by to talk to Ruth's cousin, trying to visit in the afternoons, both of us were in school. And we went by to talk to Mrs. Logan. And it was in one of these wood chips again.